everybody come on in and turn to page number 41. There's a land that's fairer than day. Everybody stand if you would. There's a land that's fairer than day, and I can see it. It's fine. It's on. Sing with me now. There's a land that is fairer than day, and by faith we can see it afar. For the Father waits over the way to prepare us a dwelling place there. In the sway by and by we shall meet on that beautiful shore. In the sweet by and by we shall meet on that beautiful shore. Sing the second. We shall sing on that beautiful shore the melodious song of the blessed, and thy spirit shall sorrow no more. Not a sigh for the blessing, resting now, and in the sway by and by we shall meet on that beautiful shore. In the sway by and by we shall meet on that beautiful shore. Everybody on the last now. To our bountiful Father above, we will offer our tribute of praise for the glorious gift of His love and the blessings that hallowed our name. In the sway by and by we shall meet on that beautiful shore. In the sway by and by, and we shall meet on that beautiful shore. Good to see each and every one of you tonight. Hope you had a good beginning to your week this week and are prepared to have a good ending to it. Thanks for the prayers on my sister. She made it in fine last night, flew in, we picked her up, took her straight to get her Mexican food fix, and then dropped her off. And amen, she upstate New York, she has to get her Mexican food fix as soon as she gets here. So we took her for her enchiladas and then dropped her off, and we'll be spending the day together tomorrow trying to rectify some of Dad's estate things and get some balls rolling. So appreciate your prayers in that. Some announcements. Pray for the young people. They should be making it to Bowling Green, Kentucky tonight. They saw the Ark yesterday, the Creation Museum today, and they started the trip back tonight. They'll make it into Bowling Green, which should lead them about a 13-hour drive, not counting bathroom stops tomorrow. Keep them in your prayers. I had to give Brother David a hard time. He miscalculated the trip up and put the wrong beginning place in his phone, and we're going to give him a hard time about it. It was a 19-hour trip into Kentucky, and he thought it was going to be 13, so he was 6 off. And so coming back, I told him, I laughed. I said, "Oh, that's okay. It happens, but you'll learn to check that starting position from now on your make sure that starting position is where it's supposed to be when you put it in your GPS." So, but they had a great time. They were great about it. Kids had a good attitude about it. They made it in to the hotel, saw the Ark yesterday, the Creation Museum today. If they make it back to Bowling Green, they'll finish the drive-in tomorrow and be back tomorrow evening. Pray for travel mercies for them. They've had a great visit so far. Just pray that it ends well and everything goes okay on the trip back. If you're going to Maine, I need to know by Sunday you're going to Maine. I need you to catch me or text me if your name's on that list and say, "We are in." And what that means is when I get these tickets solidified, I'll be letting you know what they are. Now, if you want to extend your trip and go into Boston early, you get your own just get your own tickets. That's on you. I'm going to let you go out, search the tickets, find your tickets, get them. As long as you know to meet us at the airport on Thursday, if you want to go to Maine and not stay in Boston, that's what you need to do. Other than that, if you want to go in early, I'm going to let you shop the tickets and find what you want. I know the Mullins have already purchased tickets. They're going in on Wednesday. They're going in early on Wednesday. McLeod's, are you going in early? You booked, and you're going in on Wednesday as well. So there's a few that are going in a day early. We're going to go in early, too, for the purpose of seeing Brother Adam Rivero, who's in Easton, Massachusetts. We want to go to church with them in their midweek service and see their work in Boston before we go up to Maine to visit Brother Grimless. So try to get two church planners in one trip and get the most bang for our buck, and so to speak. And Brother Adam's a longtime friend. He's a great guy, and I'm looking forward to getting a chance to visit with him. We'll probably go a little bit early, too. But those who are going on the travel date of Thursday need to get with me. I can go through Sue McCall, who's doing travel agent work now, and I can book tickets in bulk through her. I just got to know how many I'm booking and everybody's names and birthdays, stuff such as that. So if you're here tonight or you're listening online and you hear that, please let me know if that is you and you are going with the group on Thursday. All right? Missions conference starts next Wednesday night. Let's really start talking, everybody. It's Sunday, we're going to be in missions. On Sunday morning, our sermon is going to be missions geared. Sunday night, God willing, we'll be back in the book of Job, chapter number 14. I'm working on that now, and hopefully we'll be in Job 14, talking about the gulf between despair and hope on Sunday evening. And then Sunday morning, we're going to talk about the promise of hope. I think hope's a pretty important thing. So we'll look at that on Sunday morning regarding missions. And so please be in prayer for the missions conference. And let's have a fantastic start next week. The sign-up sheets are back there for meals. If you would like to take a missionary family to dinner, we encourage you to do so. It won't just be a blessing to them. You will be blessed by spending time with them and getting to know them. That's the beauty of the missions conference, is to get to know these families. And so sign up back there if you'd like to take them to dinner, or if you can help in the nursery. Please, we're going to need some nursery help. Every missionary family has babies for the nursery, all of them. We're going to have babies, okay? And so please help us out and sign up if you'd like to be on a nursery rotation. My wife will be getting in touch with you. Here is our latest, speaking of the Grimlesses, this is our latest letter from the Grimlesses up in Maine, and I thought we'd drop it in on you tonight and let you hear what's going on. It starts off fantastic in February. Brother Chris cracks me up. He's just got a great personality. He's funny. So, dear pastor, anyone who comes through winter in Maine realizes that the Lord works regardless of the circumstances. In our home, the back bathroom pipes froze weekly. Our fuel bill was $2,000 for the month of February. Again. So, again. That means it's been that much through the winter, okay? Our snowblower stopped working. Most of the month had temperatures during the day that were close to zero, as well as below zero overnight, and well below zero overnight. But God, I just love that phrase, in His wisdom brought us adult visitors. We had a great winter VBS and so much more. What a blessing it is to have young people interested in church and serving God. We have enough teenagers at this point for the teens to have their own section of the auditorium. Every one of them is here for Sunday school and morning church. Several come out for teen soul winning on Wednesday and stay for services. We're thankful for young people who are excited about Jesus. We had our first ever midwinter VBS. The local school system allowed us to distribute invitation flyers through the local primary and elementary schools. 720 children got flyers sent home in their backpacks. 10 came. 2 accepted Christ. 1 has been back with her mother every Sunday since VBS. We are so thankful for the miraculous way the Lord has allowed us to send flyers home through the public school. His kids put together a great program for Sunday morning in church. Parents came. It was God-honoring fun that lifted up the name of Christ. It also brought 3 adult visitors to church, all of whom have come back multiple times. The last weekend in February, we hosted the 2nd annual Always and Forever Marriage Refresher at the Holiday Inn in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Despite a Friday snowstorm, we had 20 couples, 17 of them pastors and their wives. They came from as far south as New Jersey and as far north as Millinocket, Maine, driving over 6 hours to be at the event. What a huge blessing it was to help these couples. One couple was so grateful. It was the first time in 6 years they were able to get away for an evening without their kids. What a joy it is to be used of the Lord to help these pastors strengthen their marriages. Prayer requests. Please pray for our heating costs. January and February cost us almost $2,000 to heat our home. Pray that these who came for VBS will continue to come. Pray that the weather breaks soon. We are praying that with another miracle, God would pay off our $84,000 mortgage that we have. Pastor, thank you. If not for your church, the prayers and the support, we would not be able to continue in these mountains. Serving Christ in the Appalachians, Chris Grimless, your missionary to J. Maine. So very excited. I can't wait to go see them. This is going to be a lot of fun for their 4th of July. We're going to have a great time. So looking forward to seeing them. Just out of curiosity, those that are going, how many it's your first mission trip? So 1, 2, 3. Awesome. That's fantastic. My first mission trip, I slept on the concrete floor with a donkey bang in my ear in Mexico. You're going to have it easy. I'll tell you about mine sometime, and you can share the stories about this one. But anyway, looking forward to visiting them and having a wonderful time and just praising God for it. And again, be a part of the missions conference. Invite friends to come. I've been telling visitors, as I've seen them, our missions conference is the place to get to know who we are. And it's my favorite thing all year, and I cannot wait again for it this year to just get involved and see what God's doing. Faith Promise Mission. All right? Brother Todd, I'm looking forward to tonight. Come on, brother, and preach for us, and when we're done, we'll do prayer time a little later.
Go ahead and turn to 2 Corinthians chapter 8. Well, last week we looked at really kind of God's pattern for missions and the way we pattern our missions programs and those kind of type of things, and so we're going to follow that up with this next one in real giving, and so we're going to look at that what's entailed in giving, and what does real authentic giving look like. And whether you're talking about giving to your tithes or your missions or maybe special projects or ministries, whatever type of giving it may be that you're giving towards, all of it could and should follow under this title, grace giving. Grace giving. In other words, we are to give by the grace of God, and we'll look at exactly what that means throughout this passage here tonight. But as one stated, said perhaps one of the most rigorous tests of authenticity in the local church is our financial giving and the heart from which we give. And those two things are very key, especially the heart from which we give. And so let's go ahead and start reading. We'll read starting in verse 1. It says, "Moreover, brethren, we do you to wit of the grace of God bestowed on the churches of Macedonia, how that in a great trial of affliction the abundance of their joy and their deep poverty abounded unto the riches of their liberality. For to their power I bear record, yea, and beyond their power, they were willing of themselves, praying us with much entreaty that we would receive the gift and take upon us the fellowship of the ministering to the saints. And this they did not as we hoped, but first gave their own selves to the Lord and unto us by the will of God, insomuch that we desire Titus, that as he begun, so he would also finish in you the same grace also. Therefore, as ye abound in everything, in faith and utterance and knowledge, and in all diligence, and in your love to us, see that you abound in this grace also. I speak not by commandment, but by occasion of the forwardness of others, and to prove the sincerity of your love. For you know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though he was rich, yet for your sakes he became poor, that ye through his poverty might be rich. And herein I give my advice, for this is expedient for you, who have begun before not only to do, but also to be forward a year ago. Now therefore perform the doing of it, that as there was readiness to will, so there may be a performance also out of that which ye have. For if there be first a willing mind, it is accepted according to that a man hath, and not according to that he hath not. For I mean not that other men be eased and ye burdened, but by an equality, that now at this time your abundance may be supplied for their want, that their abundance also may be supplied for your want, that there may be equality. Now, as we've studied through this series, we've made mention of several of the first century churches and just kind of followed along in their history. And you'll remember that there at the church of Jerusalem, in Jerusalem, great persecution came about, and it caused the saints there at Jerusalem to disperse and throughout the region there. And that between that dispersion and the saints being scattered, and then even some of their spiritual leaders being martyred, and all the things that were taking place, the church at Jerusalem was struggling, and it was struggling quite a bit. And of course, Paul knew this, and probably to some degree felt somewhat responsible for it, as he led much of the persecution early on in his life. And so he gets word of the state of the church there in Jerusalem, and the Lord put it on his heart that he wanted to help them. He had a desire to help this church in their time of need. And so apparently he had sent out this letter to the churches around and asked them to give towards the church in Jerusalem. And what we see in this letter that we're, this part of the Corinthians that we're looking at, the churches of Macedonia, which themselves, they were quite needy. They were in a pretty bad state themselves. There was a lot of persecution and poverty even where they were at, gave and responded very generously. Whereas the church in Corinth, which was in a much more affluent city and area, really had been quite indifferent to giving, to serious giving anyways. And so hence the need for Paul to address the church and to bring this to light and to admonish them in this. And so we're just going to look at here a few things that Paul brings to light about the church and what and how we ought to give to the Lord and to his ministry. So we're going to look at three things. We're going to look at their passion for giving, their perspective in giving, and then also their performance in giving. And so as you read there in the first few verses there's you can see that those Macedonian Christians had an undeniable passion for giving. They wanted to give. It was in their heart. They weren't motivated by guilt or even the expectations of Paul or others, because we'll see later that they far exceeded Paul's expectations. But because of the grace which they had experienced of themselves from God, they were passionate about giving that grace. And so their giving was developed by grace. It's the grace of God that gives us the desire and the ability to give to him. If our desire and ability to give doesn't come from the grace that God gives us, we're probably not going to be too faithful in it. Because it's that grace that God has bestowed upon us. And here in this account, that's the very first thing that Paul even mentions. He says, moreover, brethren, we do to it of the grace of God bestowed upon the church of Macedonia. Paul understood that it was God's grace that enabled them to do what they did. And that's how they were developed in their giving, is by the grace of God. Again, they weren't motivated by guilt or any kind of other motive. It was just God's grace that they had experienced. Grace is one of those things that we can't manufacture. It's not something that we can manufacture. In fact, that's exactly what Paul, the way he words it, says that was bestowed upon. Right? It was something that was supplied to them from God. It's not something you can manufacture or make up to do. It would be similarly, I was thinking about it this way. No honest Christian is going to get up in the morning and say, okay, today I am going to live out the fruits of the Spirit. Love, check. Joy, check. Peace, check. Long-suffering, Check. No. It's not going to happen. Any honest Christian is going to hit their knees to the floor in the morning and beg God, say, Lord, I need your help. Give me the grace to be able to show this person love. Lord, give me the grace to be able to be at peace with my enemies. Lord, help me to experience joy in life. Lord, give me the grace to be long-suffering towards that coworker at work that annoys the fire out of me. All those things, right? No, we understand that apart from God's grace, it's impossible to live the Christian life, right? And, you know, when it comes to giving, it's by grace as well. We got to have the same grace. And Paul pointed out to him, even he says that in verse 7 there, he says, therefore, as ye abound in everything, in faith and utterance and knowledge and in all diligence and in your love to us, see that ye abound in this grace also. He mentions, look, you've seen some spiritual growth in your church in teaching and in witnessing and in faith, all those things. He said, but you could also have this gift of giving as well by the grace of God. It's something that you can add to that. Here, the church at Macedonia, even with the loss and the poverty that they experienced, they still had an overwhelming desire to give to other Christians and to further God's work. They were motivated, again, by grace. You know, some givers may be motivated by guilt, right? Some may be motivated by greed, but real spiritual givers are motivated by the grace of God. One of those places that we could see an illustration of grace-motivated giving, which there's several that we could look to in the Bible, but you'll remember over in Mark chapter 12, the widow woman, right? In Mark chapter 12, verses 41 through 44, it says, and Jesus sat over against the treasury and beheld how the people cast money into the treasury, and many of them that were rich cast in much. And there came a certain poor widow, and she threw in 2 mites, which make a farthing. And he called unto him his disciples, and saith unto him, verily I say unto you, that this poor widow has cast more in than all they which have cast into the treasury. For all they did cast in of their abundance, but she of her want did cast in all that she had, even all her living. Many of those that would come through and that Jesus was observing, as they would come through and they would give great amounts of money, but it was to be seen of men. That was their sole motivation. They wanted to be seen of men, and they wanted to be looked up to in society, and so they would put on this show of giving. And then here's this poor widow woman who has next to nothing, and yet her giving was motivated out of her love for her Savior. And that's what she gave with. And out of that, she gave all that she had. She gave all that she had. And so their giving was developed by grace, but then it's also demonstrated by God's people. Any one of us, we can look at our budget and say, well, I got this much money left at the end of my budget. Well, I'll make sure I give that. That's not really sacrificial giving. The kind of sacrificial giving that we see that these churches did. They went way beyond what their budget would allow them, because their heart and their motivation was to minister to the Lord and minister to the Lord's people. In effect, they said this: we see what we can give, and it isn't much. We want to give more. We want to give beyond our power. Enable us to give more than what we can give. When we consider what we give to the Lord, I wonder if we take the time to ask ourselves this question: would we like to see God do more through us for His glory than we can do ourselves? Would we like to see God do more for His glory through us than we can do ourselves. Again, any one of us can look at a budget and say, well, I can afford to give this much, without ever really consulting the Lord and asking Him what He would have us to give. But we ought to have a desire, again, motivated by grace, to want to do more. And again, these believers, they had a desire and a heart to want to give above and beyond what they were physically capable of giving. And, I was thinking about that, honestly, a little bit convicted about it because, technology is great, convenience is great, but, I set up that little automatic giving thing, and it comes out every week, and I don't even have to think about it, And sometimes I wonder, am I really doing enough? And not to say that I have to physically bring it into the church and put it into a plate for the Lord to use it or anything like that, but sometimes it's not even a thought in our mind that what we're giving to the Lord. But I can remember a time, and I can kind of relate to the heart of these people, several years ago when we picked up and moved to Oklahoma City to go to Bible college. Bible college is one of those things where God takes you on a journey that has a whole lot more to do with than just going to classes. And one of those things that we had to learn and had to begin to trust God on many times was in the area of finances. Things changed drastically when we moved from Amarillo to Oklahoma City. And I can just remember, and now when I say I remember, sometimes we mix up things in our minds, so my wife can confirm or deny this later, but I seem to remember anyways having this conversation with her at some point. But just thinking about how that the Lord had provided for us in several ways, and it seemed like at times that we were always on the receiving end. And, sometimes as a man and the one that's trying to provide for his family, that it just doesn't feel like you're doing your part because you're relying on so many others to help you out. And I just remember thinking, and I believe I had this conversation with her and said, I want to at some point be on the giving end. I want to be able to be the one that is blessing somebody with giving rather than having to receive all the time. Well, God gave us that opportunity actually several different times. But one in particular that I can remember that will always stick with me, we had lived there, I think maybe a year and a half, and Ruby was with the kids and driving to go see a friend, and somebody pulled out in front of them, and she didn't even have a chance to even hit the brakes and T-boned the guy, and it totaled out her car, our van at the time. And me being the mechanic, I thought, well, I know they totaled it, but I think I can fix it. And so I ended up keeping the vehicle and instead of letting the insurance completely total it out. And of course, I got it back to the house and began to look at it. And what I had not seen from the beginning was that inside, under the hood there, the frame rail was actually bent into the motor. And when I looked at it the first time, I couldn't see that. And so obviously, it was going to be a lot more work than what I was going to be willing to put into this van. And so we were looking at what we were going to do and began praying about it. And honestly, I can't remember if I actually prayed these words, but I know I said it to more than one person. And I said, I just want God to give us a van. I just want Him to give us a van. So we're trying to figure out what we're doing with this van. And I go into work one day, and I worked at a Firestone there. And I was talking to my service manager about it, and I was just telling him, they told me that frame rail is bent, and they want such and such amount of money just to do the frame rail, and that's if I pull the motor out, and blah, all these things. And he says, well, do you think anything on that van out there would work on your van? And so there was a van of the same type, but it was several years older. I looked at it, and I said, well, I don't know, maybe. I said, well, they don't want the van anymore or what? And he said, no, the guy didn't want to fix it. He said he's tired of it. He's getting rid of it. He left the keys here. I said, really? I said, what's wrong with it? Well, it failed a block test. For what a block test means is that possibly had a blown head gasket, major engine repair, right? So I just said, well, I wonder if the guy has a title for it. So my service manager picked up the phone right there, called the guy, and he put me on the phone. I'm like, he says, hey, here, you might be interested in taking my van. I'm like, yeah, maybe. He goes, hold on, click. And within 5 minutes, he shows up with the title in hand and an extra set of keys and says, that's yours. I don't want it. It's like, okay. So I took the van home and was trying to figure out, what we were going to do with the van and if it really had a blown head gasket or not. And I hadn't really messed with it. And so I finally went out there and started working on it a little bit. And come to find out, the only thing that was really wrong with it is the cooling fan had stopped working. And so I bought a $50 part to fix the cooling fan, and we drove that van all over the place. Well, after all of that, after we've had that van for some time, we got to a point where we were going to buy a different van and replace it, and there was a family in the church there, a young family. They had 3 kids already, and if I remember right, they were already expecting their 4th, and the only vehicle they had was this tiny little red Mazda 626. Now, like a mid to late 90s. If you don't know what that car is, it was small. And I just remember seeing her one day after church, and she's trying to strap in 3 car seats across the back of this car. I said, man, they've got to do something. And they were working on it. They had been saving, and then even their Sunday school class had taken up an offering to help them get this van. And so I talked to Ruby. I said, why don't we just give them this van? She said, yeah, let's do it. So I went and talked to them and said, hey, would you be interested in this van? And we had some discussions. They wanted to try to buy it from us. And I said, no, God gave me this van. I'm not taking any money for it. And so we were able to be a blessing to that family because God was a blessing to us. And we got to be on the giving end. And so, God will, through His grace, He will enable you to do more than you ever thought you'd be able to. But let's look at a few specific things, though, concerning these believers in Macedonia that enabled them to give the way they did. Besides, obviously the grace of God, but there were some things in there that we want to specifically look at as well. So number one, they had a willing heart. Had a willing heart. Verse 3, for to their power I bear record, yea, and beyond their power they were willing of themselves. Sacrificial giving can only begin with a willing heart. If we don't have a willing heart, then obviously not much is going to happen. But here's the truth as well. It doesn't matter what we have or don't have as long as we're willing to give it. It has to begin with a willingness. One of the examples that we should take heed to are children. They are often many more times willing to give than we are, even though they don't have it. They don't know where it's coming from, but they're going to give it. I think about VBS, and we always do the penny offering thing, and man, they come in with all kinds of pennies and money, and you think, man, where do these kids come up with this stuff? It don't matter. They're going to give it. And oftentimes I've been surprised even by my own kids and how that when they've come across some money they've earned or maybe a gift from a Christmas or birthday or something like that, and then they'll want to use it for somebody else. And I think, man, I don't remember being that way when I was a kid. Where did these kids come from? But no, they're willing to give. Ephesians 5:1 says, be ye therefore followers of God, even as dear children. When in simple faith we have a willingness to give according to the direction of our Heavenly Father, that's real giving. So they had a willing heart, but then they also had ministering hearts. In verse 4 it says, praying us with much entreaty that we should receive the gift and take upon us the fellowship of the ministering to the saints. Something that was very key to their passion for giving is that they connected in their hearts and minds their giving with the benefit that giving would be to God's work and to God's people. They understood that them giving was helping the work of God to move forward. And honestly, that's what we need to keep in mind when it comes to giving and our giving to the Lord, understanding that giving is going to the work of the ministry. It's going to the furtherance of the gospel. And in realizing that that's an internal investment. There are all kinds of things here in this world that we can invest in. Some we might get a good return on our investment. Some we will not get any kind of return on our investment. But this is an investment in eternity. Matthew chapter 6, verses 19 and 20, lay not up for yourselves treasures upon earth where moth and rust doth corrupt, but where thieves break through and steal. But lay up for yourself treasures in heaven where neither moth nor rust doth corrupt, and where thieves do not break through nor steal. So when we give out of a ministering heart, we're laying up for ourselves treasures in heaven. Now, to be clear, what is the only treasure we can actually lay up in heaven? Souls. The souls of men and women that come to Christ. If you got in your mind that, hey, if I make an investment in these things, there's a big pile of gold or something waiting for me when we get to heaven, there's not going to be any need for any of that. All of our needs are going to be met. That's not what it is. The treasure is seeing the souls of men and women that came to Christ because of what you gave. And that is the ultimate reward that we'll receive. So they had willing hearts and ministering hearts. They also had sacrificial hearts. In verse 5 it says, and this they did not as we hoped, but first gave their own selves to the Lord and unto us by the will of God. The other key to their giving was they had already given themselves to the Lord. They had already given all that they had to the Lord. They understood, and what is required and where we're going to need to understand is this. We got to come to understanding that all that I have, all that I am, my possessions, whether they be bank accounts or cars or property, investment accounts, retirement accounts, whatever we could materially own on this world, it doesn't actually belong to us. It belongs to the Lord. And when we understand that and we accept that, that's when we'll begin to have a passionate heart in response to the promptings of the Lord in what He would have us to give. Romans 12:1, I beseech you therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable service. Someone said this. It said, I don't have a name for an author or anything, but it said, money is so intimately related to the possessor that we cannot give money without giving ourselves. You think that's a true statement? I think it is. I believe that's a true statement. It's so intimately related to the possessor that we cannot give money without giving ourselves. Money is just one of those necessities of life. It's one of those things we have to have in order to live and to move about within society and all those things. And it's something that we have to work for, something that we have to earn, something that we have to put in our own labor. And so when we are giving of that money, we are giving of ourselves. And so when we talk about grace giving or grace-filled giving, it always comes back to this. It always comes back to the issue of the heart. It's not what we can give, but the motivation with which we want to give. Then we'll look at the perspective in giving as well. Now, Paul, he held up this Macedonian churches there as an example of the type of giving that can happen when God's grace is given the freedom to do so. But then he turns and reminds the Corinthian Christians of the perspective of what they need to have in their giving. And the first thing he reminds them to is that you need to finish the commitment. Finish the commitment. Evidently, and it just makes sense that we're not given all the details of what was taking place here, but we can assume by what's inferred in the scripture, Paul asked for an offering. He wanted to help this church. I would assume that Paul had some kind of goal that they were trying to reach. Not that he was asking any specific person to give a certain amount or anything like that, but I believe he probably had some type of goal that he wanted to reach in giving for this church. And maybe not, but in thinking through it, I think he probably had at least some kind of idea in his mind what he thought the church needed. And evidently in that, the church at Corinth had made a commitment. They had made a commitment to give. They were going to give towards this project, but they hadn't followed through with it. They hadn't followed through with their commitment. In verses 6 and 10, it says, "Insomuch that we desired Titus that he had begun, so we would also finish in you the same grace also." In verse 10, "And herein I give my advice, for this is expedient for you who have begun before, not only to do, but also to be forward a year ago." In the beginning of this, God had evidently he'd moved on their heart and gave them the desire to want to give, but they hadn't acted on it. They hadn't followed through with the commitment, and now Titus was there and was admonishing them to, hey, you need to fulfill this commitment, and then Paul is writing them as well, just to follow up on that and say, look, you made a commitment to the Lord, you need to follow through with it. A willingness to do something doesn't mean anything if we don't actually act on it. I kept thinking about, and I know this is kind of a different context, but I kept thinking about that. Maybe you've heard the saying, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And I know that's not exactly applicable to what we're talking about, but maybe you could change that word, the road to failure. The road to failure is paved with good intentions. It doesn't matter how many good intentions we have if we don't ever put any action to it. And so here, the church at Corinth, they started with great intentions. They heard the need, and they were at least in the moment moved to want to give toward the need, and they had committed to give towards the need, but they had failed in doing so. And as believers, we ought to have the commitment to and the willingness to give to the Lord in whatever capacity that we are able. Obviously, the very baseline that we ought to start with and start giving faithfully would be our tithe, right? That would be the 10%. Malachi 3:10 says, "Bring ye all the tithes in the storehouse, that there may be meat in mine house, and prove me now there herewith, saith the Lord of hosts, if I will not open to you the windows of heaven and pour you out a blessing, that there may not be room enough to receive it." God promises great blessing when we're just faithful to give to Him, like He asked of us to. Throughout the New Testament, many of these churches, they gave far above the tithe. They were willing to give far beyond it because they had understood the grace of God that had worked in their life, and they wanted to extend that grace to others. And so, we need to be willing to do the same. But again, at least at the very base, we need to start with the tithe, and then as the Lord works in our life and begins to grow us in that grace, then we can begin to move forward in other areas as well. But anyways, he encouraged them to, number one, to finish their commitment, and then number two, to focus on Christ. Wanted them to focus on Christ. Well, he gave them the great example of the church there, but then he turns there in verses 8 and 9 for them to really focus on the example of Christ Himself. He says, "I speak not by commandment, but by occasion of the forwardness of others, and to prove the sincerity of your love. For you know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though He was rich, yet for your sakes He became poor, that ye through His poverty might be rich." The Christian life, much less giving, is never really going to make sense until we get our eyes focused on Christ. When we think about His own sacrifice that He made for us, if we don't have our focus on that, in the grace that He's given us, then really nothing else is going to make a lot of sense until we get that right. Warren Wiersbe said this, that Christian giving does not depend on material circumstances so much as spiritual convictions. Again, we've got to have that conviction that everything we have belongs to the Lord anyway. And when we understand that, then that's when we can begin to give sacrificially to the Lord, because we understand it already belongs to Him anyway. Focusing on the Lord, it produces these two things. It produces, number one, sincerity. As he pointed out there, that this offering wasn't by commandment. It was a free will offering that He asked them to give. And He pointed out this time, He was saying that if we love the Lord in truth, we will just demonstrate that through our actions of giving, just as God showed His sincerity of love by giving His Son. So focusing on the Lord produces sincerity, but it also produces sacrificial giving. And when we look at the sacrifice that Christ made for us, we ought to be willing of ourselves to give sacrificially to Him. Many times I think that we're just not willing to give sacrificially. Because I don't think we get in our minds what sacrificial really means. I'm running out of time, and we'll probably have to stop here in a moment. I won't be able to get through the end of this, but I want you to just think about this, and maybe we can come back in a couple of weeks and finish this. Next week we'll be in the missions conference, but when we think about sacrificial giving, sometimes we get in our mind and we too often think about what we don't have and think, well, how could I ever give to God sacrificially when I can only afford this or that or whatever the case may be. We look at our budget and think, well, there's no way I can give any more than this amount. When the truth is, we're probably just unwilling to give up certain things that God probably doesn't want us to have in the first place. There's many things that we can enjoy in life and end up paying for, and everything in the world today is a subscription service. And we're paying for all those things, and it may be that some of those things could just be easily discontinued and done without for us to be able to give to the Lord sacrificially. And we only got about halfway through the lesson tonight, so we'll pick it up here in about 2 weeks. We'll be in the mission conference next week. But I don't know what I was going to say, so come on.
In 1 Corinthians 16, you see where Paul asked originally for offering. He said, churches in Galatia have started this process. You need to do the same thing. He said, so that there be no gatherings when I come, and go ahead and choose out the person that you want to carry the offering to Jerusalem. He wrote that in 1 Corinthians 16. In 1 year later in 2 Corinthians 8, 1 year, still hadn't acted. I've used the example before and couldn't help but think of him where Todd was teaching. I really enjoyed that. Mine. Brother Todd can understand this. He's been there with me. We were in the Philippines. Let me tell you what, you really understand the Americans' concept of giving. And you see the people there who we would say of all accounts have nothing. But I'll be honest, who are many times wealthier than we are. And the way they give, absolutely. They just finished their missions conference in February. Their average attendance for missions conference a night is 200. These folks, rather, and understand me when I say this, they get it because it was a missionary coming to them that allowed their pastor to get saved. He's now pastoring them. Because they were blessed through that, they're all the more pressed to do the same thing because they want to return the love that was shown them because someone sent a missionary to their village. And the man that pastors them and loves them was won to the Lord because America sent a missionary. And we don't understand that in the States because we have such a rich history in Christianity. We can't look back and say, well, a missionary from so-and-so country came and won our pastor, and that's why we have this church. We can't say that. We know our church came through other churches, but we don't have that same connection that when you go to the field and there are people in their family going to heaven because a missionary showed up in their village. And so when you tell them about giving to missions, yeah. Because the only reason we have hope is because someone we don't know gave to missions. Sometimes I think that hurts us because we don't have that direct connection. The people in Jay, Maine that are being ministered to by the Grimless family, they understand what it is. They have a man there that loves them, that ministers, because churches around the country are seeing to it that he can stay there and do that. That's the grace of giving in missions. That's it. And so you see people that have nothing, that have a love for people like that. It just absolutely breaks your heart. May we have that understanding that the souls of it's not just about raising an offering. I mean, yes, we're doing our faith promise, but don't get hung up in that. It's about seeing missionaries get to the field so they can share the gospel and see people get saved. That's what it's about. And the fact that it takes a missionary 3 years on average, 300 people die without the gospel in 3 years, while they transverse this nation trying to get support. Whatever we can do to help, we need to help. I didn't mean to jump in on you. That's something